Welcome to Sunny's Mindset Lab podcast. Today, we're exploring Serial Winner, 5 Actions to Create Your Cycle of Success with its author, Larry Weidel. This book breaks down how consistent success is built through action, discipline, and personal responsibility, not luck or talent.
Thank you, Sunny. Serial Winner is about understanding how people who win consistently think and act, and how anyone can apply those same actions to create progress in their own life.
That's a perfect place to start. So today, we're going to walk through the core ideas from your book. We'll kick things off with the big one, the cycle of winning itself. Then we'll get into the details of 3 of the most crucial actions: decide, overdo, and adjust. And to wrap it all up, we'll talk about how our listeners can start their own cycle. Sound good?
Okay, so let's jump right in. Your book introduces this idea of serial winners. These are people who just seem to move from one success to another, almost like it's second nature. But you argue it's not magic at all. So what is it? What is this core concept that really separates them from everybody else?
Well, you're right. It's not magic, it's a system. The thing is, serial winners aren't special or born with some massive advantage. What they do is they leverage a cycle of 5 specific actions to make consistent daily progress. And you can see them right here. First, they decide on a path. Then they overdo the initial effort to really build that momentum. When they hit a wall, and they always do, they adjust. They finish what they start, and finally, they never stop trying to keep improving. This cycle, this is their roadmap. It's what they come back to day in and day out.
What's so interesting about that, Larry, is how simple it sounds on the surface. Decide, overdo, adjust. These feel like fundamentals we've all heard before. So if the actions themselves are so simple, what makes them so incredibly powerful? What's the missing piece for most people?
The missing piece is consistent action. It's as simple and as difficult as that. Most people are familiar with these concepts, but they just don't apply them consistently. They'll decide on a goal, but then they hesitate. Or they'll start something, but they don't put in enough effort to break through that initial resistance. And then, when they hit that first setback, they quit instead of adjusting. The key takeaway is that winners aren't necessarily better people, they just consistently do the things that others don't, over and over again.
That makes perfect sense. The consistency is everything. So let's break down that very first action, decide. A big theme in the book is don't hesitate. Why is hesitation so incredibly damaging to our chances of success?
Because the clock is always ticking. Winning requires forward movement, and that starts with making a decision. When you let doubt creep in, it leads to indecision and hesitation, and right behind that comes fear. And once fear sets in, you just grind to a halt. The work stops, and without action, there's absolutely no hope for progress.
You put it so powerfully in the book. With paralysis comes certain failure. But what about the person listening who feels like they can't decide because they think they're starting from a disadvantage? They believe others were just born with more talent or have better connections or a better education.
Right.
I call those the myths of advantage. You can see them here. People convince themselves that winners are just born that way, or come from better families, or have a fancy education. But the truth is, persistence will always trump raw talent. Character and commitment matter a whole lot more than a degree. As Calvin Coolidge famously said, nothing in this world can take the place of persistence.
And this really gets to the core of it. No advantage, no matter how great, can guarantee you'll win. And on the flip side, no lack of advantage guarantees you'll lose. In fact, what I've seen is that an early advantage can sometimes make you soft. It's the disadvantages that often create the hunger and the drive. They push people to outthink, outwork, and ultimately outperform their more advantaged counterparts.
I love that, turning a disadvantage into your fuel. That seems like a perfect transition to the next action, which feels much more intense: overdo. You make the case that the famous slogan, "Just do it," isn't actually good enough. Why is that? Why is massive initial effort so critical?
Well, because just doing it can actually set you up for failure. The reality is, nearly everyone, and I mean everyone, underestimates the time, the energy, and the resources it takes to achieve a new goal. The analogy I use in the book is a space shuttle launch. It burns millions of pounds of propellant in just the first few minutes. Why? To break free from Earth's gravity. That incredible upfront energy is what creates the momentum for the entire mission. Winners approach their goals with that exact same mindset.
That space shuttle analogy really drives it home. It leads perfectly to this quote from the book, "It's doing the extras that add the extras to your life." So let's break that down practically. What's the logic here?
Why is overdoing it at the start such an effective strategy?
It really works for 4 key reasons. First, like we said with the rocket, it breaks gravity. It creates that initial momentum to push you through all the friction you're going to face. Second, it compensates for our natural tendency to underestimate the effort required. Third, and this one is so important, it builds confidence. Those little early wins prove to yourself that you can actually do this. And finally, it activates what I call the law of high numbers. You put in so much activity that success becomes a statistical probability, not just a matter of luck.
You're essentially putting the odds in your own favor through sheer effort. Okay, so you've decided you've overdone the initial push, and then inevitably you hit a wall. Something goes wrong. This brings us to your third action, adjust. How do serial winners handle the setbacks that would stop most people dead in their tracks?
I understand a very simple truth. Life shows absolutely no sympathy. I tell a story in the book about playing high school football in Italy. My tiny school was playing a team 8 times our size, and before the game, one of their players handed me this sarcastic card as a joke. It was funny, but it drove home a very real point. Whining about the hand you're dealt accomplishes nothing. The world doesn't care.
And that's the crucial point right there. You don't just get one second chance in life. You get them again and again and again, as long as you refuse to quit. When winners face a challenge, they pick themselves up, they adjust their plan, and they keep moving. Winning is really just a long series of adjustments. Defeat is not permanent until you quit.
That's such a powerful message, especially for anyone listening who feels stuck right now. And that brings us to what might be the most practical question of all. If you're feeling frustrated, if you feel like you're not making any progress, what's the very first step?
It is the most basic question, isn't it? So now, what do I do? And the book gives a very direct, very actionable answer for that exact feeling.
The answer is always to turn to the fundamentals. Just go back to the basics. When you're confused, when you're overwhelmed, and you don't know what to do next, the cycle of winning is designed to show you the appropriate action. You don't have to have everything figured out, you just have to take the next logical step.
You just look at the cycle. Is there a decision you've been putting off? Okay, then your next step is to decide. Are you stuck and lacking momentum? Then it's time to overdo your activity. Did you just hit a major roadblock? Well, then you need to adjust your approach. The cycle itself becomes your map. The key is to stop focusing on your frustration and turn that energy into action. Larry, thank you for walking us through the powerful ideas in Serial Winner. This conversation gives our listeners a clear framework for building consistent success through action. Thank you, Sonny. I hope these ideas help your listeners take responsibility, stay in motion, and create their own cycle of winning. This has been Sonny's Mindset Lab. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.